All right, let's talk about something that is, well, it's pretty out there. We're going to dive into a seriously mind-bending idea today. What if one of the oldest ways humans tried to understand the universe, I'm talking about astrology, is actually a peek into one of our newest, most wild theories? The idea that we're all living inside a giant computer simulation. I know, it sounds like pure sci-fi, but stick with me, because the connections are way deeper than you might think.
So let's just rip the Band-Aid off and start with the biggest question of all. Is our universe a computer simulation? Is everything you see, everything you feel, everything you are just an incredibly advanced, super realistic program? This isn't just a late-night dorm room question anymore. It's an idea that's seriously being talked about.
So, the core idea here is called the Simulation Hypothesis. A philosopher named Nick Bostrom really brought this into the spotlight. And it basically says this: what we call the laws of physics, they might just be lines of code. You know, gravity, the speed of light, cause and effect. Maybe they're all just the programmed rules that make our world run.
Now, of course, our ancient ancestors weren't thinking about computers, but they were obsessed with patterns. I mean, they saw the cycles of the moon, the steady paths of the planets, the way the seasons always changed right on schedule, and to them, it didn't feel random. It felt like a grand design, like a kind of cosmic code written across the night sky.
And this is where it gets really cool. You can almost translate some of these ancient ideas into modern tech speak. So take the concept of Maya from Vedic thought. It's this idea that our physical world is, in a way, an illusion. Well, what's the simulation term for that? A rendered reality. A world being generated or drawn by a computer.
And it doesn't stop there. The ancient idea of gods, or maybe a single creative force like Brahman, being the source of that illusion, well, that has a direct modern parallel, doesn't it? The architects of the system, the programmers.
You can even bring this down to a really personal level. Think about ideas like karma or destiny, this feeling that certain actions will inevitably lead to certain results. In this new framework, what does that become? It's just the simulation's coded rules. It's the program running its course based on your inputs.
So if you follow this line of thinking, astrology starts to look completely different. It stops being some ancient superstition and starts looking like an attempt to reverse engineer the simulation's operating system. It's like our ancestors found a user manual for the program's internal clock.
Okay, it's a thrilling idea, right? But here's the reality check. Does it actually hold up to history? I mean, did the people who invented astrology really think they were characters in some cosmic computer game? Well, when you look at the historical record, you get a very different story.
If you look at the timeline, you see astrology didn't start out as this philosophical tool for understanding reality. Not at all. It began way back in Babylon, and it was all about divination for the king. It was about figuring out the fate of the entire empire, not your personal love life.
You gotta understand, for the early Babylonians, this was all about theology. The planets weren't just points of light, they were living, breathing gods, like Marduk and Ishtar. So watching their movements wasn't science, it was statecraft. It was the king's way of trying to figure out what the gods wanted to protect the whole country.
Everything changed during the Hellenistic period. You get this injection of Greek philosophy and, crucially, Greek geometry and math. Suddenly, the focus shifts from the fate of the nation to the destiny of the individual. And that's where the personal birth chart, the horoscope we know today, is born. It becomes this really complex mathematical system for mapping out a single person's life.
So, when you actually put them side by side, the conflict is pretty stark. The whole worldview of ancient astrology is based on a cosmos that is alive, divine, and, most importantly, real. The simulation hypothesis, it's based on a reality that is computational, data-driven, and ultimately artificial. Historically speaking, they just don't mix.
So that's it then? Case closed? Well, not so fast. Because even though their historical roots are totally different, there's a concept from modern science that builds this incredible metaphorical bridge between the ancient world and our digital one.
And that bridge is chaos theory. You've probably heard of it as the butterfly effect, right? It's this wild idea that in any complex system, like a weather pattern, or maybe, just maybe, an entire universe, the tiniest little change at the beginning can snowball into massive, totally unpredictable results later on.
Now, think what that means inside a simulation. A programmer who wants to influence things wouldn't need to show up in a flash of light or break the laws of physics. Nope. All they'd have to do is make one tiny microscopic nudge at the right place in the right time, and the rules of chaos would do the rest, amplifying that tiny input into a huge guided outcome. They could steer the whole course of history without ever leaving a fingerprint.
And just like that, we have a brand new, scientific-sounding language for a very, very old idea, the concept of divine providence. You know, that sense of a subtle, guiding hand shaping events from behind the scenes. What our ancestors called the will of the gods, we can now think of, metaphorically, as a programmer using the rules of chaos.
And really, that gets right to the heart of it all. As humans, we have always been wrestling with the same huge questions. Are we in control? Is there some kind of pattern to all of this? Is there a higher power guiding things? Look, the questions, they never ever change. It's just the language and the metaphors we use to try and answer them that do.
So, back then, the ancient world talked about divine providence to explain that feeling of a guided universe. Today, we can use the language of science and talk about chaos-driven cosmic control. It's two completely different explanations for the exact same deep human intuition.
And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. If the ancients looked up at the patterns of the stars to try and make a map of their reality to understand its grand design, what are the stars that we're looking to today? Is it big data? Is it algorithms? Is it quantum physics? What's the map that you are using to navigate this incredibly complex world of ours?